Welcome to The Explainer. Today we are jumping right into a mystery that has fascinated thinkers for, well, thousands of years. It's one of those questions that really pushes our understanding to the absolute limit, and it's all about the ultimate fate of someone who has achieved enlightenment. So, let's get straight to it. What is this huge mystery? We're not talking about just any death here. This is about the final stop for someone who has completely, totally broken free from that cycle of suffering and rebirth. So, where do they go? What happens to them? What's so striking is the language you find in the ancient texts. When the Buddha's followers talked about his passing, they didn't say his soul was going to some paradise. They used this word extinguishment, a full extinguishment. It's a really powerful and, let's be honest, kind of a jarring word that just completely challenges our normal ideas about what comes after life. So to even start to wrap our heads around what extinguishment could mean, the Buddha did something pretty brilliant. He just cleared the table of all the easy, comfortable answers. He started by explaining what it isn't. And to do that, he took on the two biggest theories of his day. Okay, so on one hand, you've got eternalism. That's the idea that some core part of you, a soul, lives on forever. This is the basis for most ideas about heaven or an afterlife. And on the other hand, you have annihilationism, the belief that when you die, you are just completely gone. Poof, lights out. And really, these two ideas still cover how most of us think about death today, right? But here's the absolute kicker. The Buddha said both of these views are fundamentally wrong. They're traps. And why? Because they both start with the exact same flawed idea, that there's some kind of fixed, solid, permanent self that's either going to be saved or destroyed. And this image just illustrates the problem perfectly. It doesn't matter if you're terrified of being wiped out or desperately hoping you'll live forever, you're still just like that dog running in frantic circles around the same post. That powerful, deep-seated idea of I and me. Both views are just different ways of being chained to that idea of a self. Okay, so if the big question isn't about what happens to a self, then what are we talking about? The Buddha's answer completely flips the script. For someone who is enlightened, death isn't about where a person goes, it's about what process finally, completely stops. This is what extinguishment really points to. It's the entire engine of suffering just grinding to a halt. That endless cycle of birth and death, what's called samsara, it's over. The craving and the clinging that fuel that whole cycle, gone. The creation of new karma, the very actions that keep the wheels spinning, it stops. It is the end of suffering itself. Period. And when you read the actual words from the monks who achieved this, that sense of finality is just, it's crystal clear. There's no hint of them hoping for some other life. Instead, what you feel is this incredible sense of relief that the hard work is finally finished. They say it again and again, with just zero ambiguity. For them, it wasn't some mystery to be figured out later. The whole process that leads from one life to the next was understood, and because it was understood, it was over. And a line like this really shows us that we're dealing with something way beyond our normal categories of thinking. It's not about escaping death so you can live forever. It's about stepping completely outside of that whole duality of living versus dying. Okay, so we've talked about what it's not and what process actually comes to an end. But that still leaves the biggest question on the table, right? What do the texts actually say this final state is? First off, just so we're all on the same page, the texts call these enlightened beings arahants, the perfected ones. These are the people who have reached the finish line. As the texts say, they have done what had to be done. And that brings us right back to our original question, but now it's way more focused. We've thrown out the two obvious answers. They don't continue on forever, and they're not just blinked out of existence. So, what in the world is left? And here it is, the profound and honestly pretty mind-bending answer from the texts themselves. Their final destiny is unknowable. And get this, it's not just unknown to us humans. It's unknowable even to gods and other powerful beings. Why? Because it is completely outside the entire conceptual framework of reality as we know it. Now, it's so important to understand this isn't a dodge. It's not the Buddha just saying, I don't know. No, it's the most precise answer you can possibly give. The state of an arahant after death cannot be described with words like exists or doesn't exist because it transcends both. Our entire language, our whole way of thinking, is built inside those two boxes. This state is somewhere else entirely. So, if our normal logic and our language just completely break down at this point, how can we even begin to get a handle on this idea? How can we get any kind of feel for what this might be like? Well, this is where the texts do something really beautiful. They shift from philosophy to poetry. When you can't define something literally, the only thing you can do is point towards it with metaphors and powerful images. And these aren't meant to be definitions. They're meant to give you a feeling, a glimpse of the freedom that's been won. And these images are just incredible. Think about a snake just effortlessly shedding its old, tight skin, finally free to move. Or think of the full moon being released from the shadow of an eclipse, shining in its full, natural brightness. And then maybe the most famous one of all, a fire that's run out of fuel. It isn't destroyed, it's simply cooled, quenched, finally at peace. And that leaves us with this final, really powerful thought to sit with. If our whole experience of being alive is like a fire that's constantly fueled by craving, by desire, by attachment, what does it really mean when that flame finally goes out? Maybe the ultimate goal was never about finding a new place to exist, but about finding a profound, indescribable peace from that burning need to be anywhere at all.